Welcome to Enlightened Radio. This is John Case, and today's program, broadcast on April the 16th, is Talkin Socialism, edition number 3. 2020 features a special guest, Ted Boettner, who was actually introduced shortly before this tape begins. And also our regulars, J.B. Christensen, Mike Diesel, Dr. Zaki McGill joins us also, president of the Berkeley County NAACP, and we discuss a couple of big questions. The tape starts in just a second, right after a message from our sponsor, the Wolf at the End of the Road.
And when he reached the last of the small dark juniper trees where the broad valley ran under the Animus peaks, he crouched quietly to steady his breath, and then raised himself slowly and looked out. They were running on the plain, harrying the antelope, and the antelope moved like phantoms in the snow, and circled and wheeled, and the dry powder blew about them in the cold moonlight, and their breath smoked palely in the cold as if they burned with some inner fire, and the wolves twisted and turned and leapt in a silence such that they seemed of another world entire. They moved down the valley and turned and moved far out on the plain until they were the smallest of figures in that dim whiteness, and then they disappeared. He was very cold. He waited. It was very still. He could see by his breath how the wind lay, and he watched his breath appear and vanish and appear and vanish constantly before him in the cold, and he waited a long time. Then he saw them coming, loping and twisting, dancing, tunneling their noses in the snow, loping and running and rising by twos in a standing dance, and running on again. There were 7 of them, and they passed within 20 feet of where he lay. He could see their almond eyes in the moonlight. He could hear their breath. He could feel the presence of their knowing that was electric in the air. They bunched and nuzzled and licked one another. Then they stopped. They stood with their ears cocked, some with one forefoot raised to their chest. They were looking at him. He did not breathe. They did not breathe. They stood. Then they turned and quietly trotted on. When he got back to the house, Boyd was awake, but he didn't tell him where he'd been or what he'd seen. He never told anybody. And when he reached the last of the small dark juniper trees where the broad valley ran under the Animus peaks, he crouched quietly to steady his breath, and then raised himself slowly and looked out. They were running on the plain, harrying the antelope, and the antelope moved like phantoms in the snow, and circled and wheeled, and the dry powder blew about them in the cold moonlight, and their breath smoked palely in the cold as if they burned with some inner fire, and the wolves twisted and turned and leapt in a silence such that they seemed of another world entire. They moved down the valley and turned and moved far out on the plain until they were the smallest of figures in that dim whiteness, and then they disappeared. He was very cold. He waited. It was very still. He could see by his breath how the wind lay, and he watched his breath appear and vanish and appear and vanish constantly before him in the cold, and he waited a long time. Then he saw them coming, loping and twisting, dancing, tunneling their noses in the snow, loping and running and rising by twos in a standing dance, and running on again. There were 7 of them, and they passed within 20 feet of where he lay. He could see their almond eyes in the moonlight. He could hear their breath. He could feel the presence of their knowing that was electric in the air. They bunched and nuzzled and licked one another. Then they stopped. They stood with their ears cocked, some with one forefoot raised to their chest. They were looking at him. He did not breathe. They did not breathe. They stood. Then they turned and quietly trotted on. When he got back to the house, Boyd was awake, but he didn't tell him where he'd been or what he'd seen. He never told anybody.
There's uncertainty about whether you can use it and give it, because a good portion of it's supposed to go to local government, cities, county governments.
Yeah.
Now, a week or two we'll figure it out, but they're going to need a lot more money. And I'd say the next 2-3 weeks they're going to have to call a special session or do something, because we can't print money, so we have to be able to balance our budget. So, but the sad part is when they passed the bill, it's like they didn't put in the flexibility needed, like the first stimulus,
Right.
to go from there to there. But it's good to see everybody on board for socialism. We went from, no Republicans voting for the first stimulus to what? Unanimous support for $2 trillion. I knew that $2 trillion was there the whole time.
Well, they're all students of modern monetary theory now, which says that.
Did we talk about that like 5 years ago on your show or something? I remember.
Yeah, we mentioned it first. It was just coming out then, and there was some controversy.
Well, when you say that, John, at the end of every time you say Trump's gonna, you always gotta say, believe me, 3 times. It's like a magical thing that all of a sudden, if you say it 3 times, I have spoken.
Let me revisit a question that's bothered me ever since I heard about it, and that is the alleged $83 billion investment that was supposedly going to happen, mainly around energy and related manufacturing development from China. And then all of a sudden the Trump trade war with China picked up steam, and we started to hear less, and then we heard nothing about the China deal. I mean, $83 billion is bigger than the GDP of West Virginia for a year. So it's a big number. And this state needs development. There's no question about that. So, a lot of things somebody could do with $83 billion if they had it, no matter where it came from, that might transform this state from headed toward Libya headed toward Norway, kind of dynamic. And anyway, Ted, what happened to the $83 billion?
If I had it, I know it. I think there's a lot of things going on with that. I mean, if you guys noticed that West Virginia Impact Fund that they passed during the legislative session this year, that was mostly because of that lost money. They're trying to figure out how to attract foreign capital, specifically China. I guess the Impact Fund came about because Speaker Hanshaw and a couple of his attorneys, maybe, or finance people, went to China and said,
What do you say?
To be able to put money in this to get around some federal international finance issues.
Your audio hiccuped there. Could you just repeat that last sentence?
Yeah, I was saying that they set up the fund to sort of get around some federal international economic issues. CFIUS is this called, CFIUS. So, yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to see that happening now. And now you have another delegate, Higginbotham, who's said if anybody from China operates a business in West, you don't have to pay any income taxes for 10 years. It's a new proposal he's putting out. It's really just a sign of just deep desperation. That we are relying so heavily on this outside capital to come in and do this. And I think the handwriting is finally completely on the wall. Not that it hasn't been there, but when it comes to the petrochemical build out, the storage hub, it's not happening.
Thank God.
It is. I mean, like when you see Goldman, you see Moody's and everybody saying the cracker's not going to happen in Ohio. The only reason the petro hub can happen is if the crackers happen. The crackers have to have the hub, to get the fuel. So I mean, it's very difficult to see this build out happening. And you just saw that Longview, the coal power plant in Morgantown, the best one, of the cleanest ones in the country, just filed bankruptcy. And they were looking at building a gas-fired power plant, another one in Morgantown. Don't see that happening.
Yeah, you hiccuped.
Real collapse because also the drop in oil prices too. But this whole idea of making West Virginia this petrochemical hub just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. And I think that's tied up in the $83 billion deal with China, whatever it was.
What happened to? I understand that they found a geothermal hotspot somewhere in the northern part of the state that was alleged to be among the largest in the world. What
I think it's the eastern part of the state.
Is it the eastern?
Yeah.
I thought it was in the northern.
Greenbrier County, I think.
Okay.
Over that way.
They are doing a lot of hydro. I mean, West Virginia could have a lot of hydro energy if it wanted to. That could be a good and bad thing in some ways, but it's better than gas and coal in my mind. But
Anyway, for the state to take over the entire energy industry and to by any means, whatever, and redirect those resources. At least you'd have a bank account with to invest in positive things. You still there? Did you hear me?
yeah, I missed that last part. I'm sorry.
Any way to have it leverage. I mean, if some political coalition came to power and said, "Look, we're going to either raise the rates to the point where we're going to basically own it, and we'll pay operators, but we're going to set up sovereign wealth fund. We're going to do what Norway did, basically." And and reinvent our state, but we're gonna this will be our bank account since nobody's coming over the hill to save us. Okay, so
John knows we try. I mean, I spent 3 years of my life trying to get them to set up a sovereign wealth fund or a permanent mineral trust fund, and they set one up and put no money in it.
Right. All they've done is live off the rainy day fund.
Yeah. Well, they need a cartel. I mean, I've been watching Ozark lately, so excuse me if I start talking about cartels all the time. But I mean, that's what you kind of need a
I'm
cartel.
Italian, don't worry about it. I get it. I'm used to it. I know.
Right.
Forget about it. You know what I'm saying? This guy, hey, look, you got to pay the VIG. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, actually, what's the VIG? I'm not going
to let you know what that is until I show up at your door. But could be me, could be
100% a day. I mean,
who knows? Who the hell knows?
Norway's got $1 trillion in assets. They have the same amount of people as Minnesota. So they have like $250,000 per person in Norway because
isn't that nice? They don't have to worry about Social Security.
And they started that in the 90s. That was started in the 90s. That fund, right. Not if we would have done the same, but the show's going to be over. That's my big thing. If you're not getting the money now, the gas industry is very smart about stopping any severance tax increases because they know this is over in 20 years. It has to be. The big show is over because we have to go to a low carbon economy. So.
Yeah. Right. That's interesting.
Whether she wants to do or not.
The show, the fact of that is
they're going to get out of here with paying.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me switch gears for a second here, Ted, and I'd like to talk to Dr. McGill for a minute because I have this terrible sense that the slowness in testing. I mean, we are testing more, especially in some of the hotspot areas, but the slowness makes it very difficult, one, to figure out how bad things are, and two, somehow contributes to, Trump, somehow I think it figures that he doesn't mind the high death count. And the reason he doesn't mind the high death count is because he keeps his emergency powers intact. And so I think if he had his way, he would like to moderate it. So it was at a certain sufficient enough level so his billionaire buddies who are yelling at him about opening the economy, the owner of Hardee's and people like that, okay? And then he could keep enough people dying so he keeps emergency power. So just in case it looks like he's going to lose the election, he can cancel it. And he sort of declared that the other day. So my question to you, Zaki, is really where are we? What can we do? Because that scenario is, everyone say, oh yeah, well, everyone's going to see it and they're going to knock him down. But terror has its own logic, okay, and in many cases it achieves its intended result. What do you think?
Well, John, I think there's still so much we don't know about this virus. I was listening to NPR's town hall last night on the virus with lots of scientists and virologists and so forth, and we don't know, if we're going to have effective treatments. We don't know how many false negatives there are with these PCR tests that we're running. We don't know when they're going to be more widely available. We don't know if when people develop immunity to this, if it's long lasting, if there is any immunity, any herd immunity that could be developed. So we don't know, just like with, common flu, if you catch the flu, the flu or the cold during the season of winter, you generally have a short-term kind of immunity from getting reinfected. We don't know with this virus if I've already had it, which I suspect I did back in January.
Really?
We don't know if you can actually get reinfected again, or if you're going to be immune for maybe through the end of the year or to the next cycle. They're predicting this resurgence sometime maybe in the summer or the fall. So
who's predicting that?
Well, I've heard various scientists, virologists, scientists, people who work on vaccines talking about even that China may be seeing another tick up in their cases. That maybe it's gone from one population center to another, So I think to broadly answer your question, I don't think we know enough. Now you ask, what can we do? I guess we can demand wider testing. I just saw a clip from a group of Black doctors in Philadelphia. They're calling themselves the Black Physician COVID Consortium, and they got banded together and are sort of collating access to the test, and then organizing, a way that people can call in and get a reservation to get the test when they have the packets. So I think, so it sounds like, some groups are doing that. I asked, I called in to the Berkeley County and to find out, how I could get the test. And at this point, it's only, you have to have your doctor's order, and you have to be showing symptoms. And as JB can attest to, even if you call in and say, well, these are my symptoms, they may tell you, well, just wait a while, see how you are tomorrow. If it doesn't sound like it's absolutely emergent, then you're going to be put off in terms of getting the testing.
Well,
it's interesting, John. Can I?
Yes, go ahead, Mike. Sure.
A little bit, Zaki. You had said you may have thought that you had it. An interesting thing, I don't know if everybody knows, about a year ago, a little over a year ago, I was in the hospital twice, and they first described it as H1N1. Mm-hmm. Then they said, no, it's not H1N1. We think it's a lung infection. Well, we think it's this. Well, because you're a smoker or former smoker, you have COPD, but we don't know what this infection is. Mm-hmm. And I went in, and they thought they had taken care of me. I got out. As soon as I got out that day, I went right back in because I started to feel heavy and couldn't breathe and had all these issues. And they had, they'd given me prescription stuff, but I'm wondering if because there was an indication, even by Fauci and a few other scientists, saying that there were a few cases identified a long time ago in the United States.
I've heard the same report.
Okay, all right, very good. And John even said that he felt like he may have had it too.
Me and JB were, but I think when we had the same thing, I think actually
right.
nearly the same time, and our friend who also had it and was hanging out with JB got tested negative, so that theory got a little bit damaged. But what about the?
But there are false negatives. From what John Aldish, the local infectious disease expert who spent 30 years in foreign services, told me, is that the test they're using is called a PCR. All it does is amplify any virus that may be present in the nasal passage at that time. Suppose you in your nose, or suppose there's just none present right there, or they didn't swab it right at that point. The point is that, thing that concerns a lot of clinicians like myself is the false negatives. They're telling people, no, there's none present, but they don't really know. And I don't know when an actual antibody test is going to be available. Apparently that's available in tertiary medical centers, but don't know if that,
Right.
which would be the definitive. If you actually have antibodies to it, then we know you've been infected with it and you
Right.
antibodies.
That makes sense.
But again, we don't.
Let me get you to also comment, if I could, on the WHO withdrawal of funds and support from the WHO, which is, I understood just yesterday, for instance, there was a report that that was going to have a direct impact, for example, on polio in Africa. I'm sure it's going to have much wider impact than that. But what's your comment on that?
Yeah, I heard another report where all of this is devastating countries in Africa. Their efforts to contain malaria. A lot of these countries don't even have adequate measles and mumps vaccines. So to expect them to have a COVID infrastructure is just a bridge too far. I had a white female friend last night, activist in Delaware, say to me that she thinks Trump targeted the WHO because it's headed by a man of color. And
what can we say about? What interest does a man who would do this to the global? Who would he not kill in the United States? Who's going to be free from his contempt? It's complete contempt for stopping the deaths or lowering them. He doesn't care. It's really a political game. If it was if he could win better by killing more people, he would do it.
Well, I agree. My working thesis has always been that Trump has absolutely nothing to lose by making the country collapse or the world collapse. All he wants to do is escape prosecution for his crimes.
The only way to do that is win. He has to win the election, or he has to suspend the election somehow, some way. And based on what I saw in Wisconsin, I'm not too sure. I think that even concerned Yurdle Turtle, Mr. McConnell. What he saw in Wisconsin, they were like, I don't know, they're even coming out and I don't know that if we are able to have a free and fair election, his ass is gone. I can say that.
Well, right. So we had that problem in 59. I hope that's the fear everybody is feeling, I think. Ted, let me ask you, go back a little bit to the economic question for a second. And so I had a conversation about 5 years ago. I think JB and I were down at one of those Warm Springs things where ARA, Alliance for Retired Americans gatherings at the AFL-CIO was at, and I always had I remember having this great conversation with a bunch of the guys from the United Mine Workers, and I had just had the benefit of talking with my wife, who's a real economist. I just read her books. She calculated that, just on the back of the matchbook, that if you took the productivity, relative productivity and wage diversion and graphs there that took place, if you just start back in 1980, you could say that the miners were probably owed about $1 million apiece. For lost income and injustices of various kinds, and so I was sitting there with that number, and I said, so, arguing about the future of coal and all that, and I said, so how about this? If I pay each of you guys $1 million apiece, which is about what you're owed, okay, to go off and do something else or do whatever you wanted to do,
retire.
And they gave me a hard time for a minute, and I said, $1 million. Okay, you're going to vote yes or no, okay? And the guys, $1 million. Okay, $1 million. I'm good with $1 million.
They should have $1 million in their pension funds.
Well, yeah, you know, and so there's a price at which, you know, the wounds and grievances that might be argued about for a century can be healed, okay? But there is that price. Where do we, what's the economic development vision after you've been, you know, I'm sure knocked down many times over the past few years?
Yeah.
How do you see it playing out? Is there any way through internal politics that we can, and declining population, that we can put together something that would challenge this and as it's falling?
Yeah, I think at the federal.
Oh, you're hiccuping again there.
Maybe we could have a transition office, which is a bill that almost got over to the Senate this year. But yeah, I think, I mean, the interesting part is if you take the bailout of the agriculture industry that Trump's on, $38 billion, by that number, you could get everybody that's in the NIC code 2121, the coal mining industry, $500,000 each. So there's your, you know, halfway there, John. You're halfway there.
And you're saying for under 70 billion, we can accomplish exactly what the hell John just said.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the important part is, John, when you're looking at the coal mining, I mean, when you actually drill into the granular and you look out how old people are in the industry, how much you'd have to pay to actually help with a just transition, give them, you know, the pensions. It's actually not that much money at all, because I mean, like, you know, 15 to 20% of people in the quote coal industry are engineers. They're like, you know, they're people who have really good skills that have master's degrees and managers, people that like coal, like Joe Manchin was a coal broker. That's included in that. When we talk about coal miners, you know, that's the funny part is like, that's the coal industry. We're including those people in that 50,000. And so many people are close to retirement. I mean, it actually wouldn't cost nearly as much as you think it would. There's a good study that Bob Poland did from Puri that looked at bailing out fossil fuel workers in Colorado. And just to give you an idea, there are about 35,000 fossil fuel workers, and there's about the same amount in West Virginia. And his conclusion was you only really need to spend money on about 680 people per year. So that's not too bad. You know, you start thinking about transitioning and helping figure that out. It actually costs a lot less than you think it does. So we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay. You could do a pretty good transition in West Virginia for you know, $200 or $300 million a year. You could help the workers. Now we probably need the magnitude of $50 to $60 billion over 10 years in West Virginia to really help the state deal with that restitution issue that you talked about, and help the state help deal with the environmental damage, the legacy costs, ash ponds, sludge ponds. Ash piles, sludge ponds, reclamation.
That's for the coal ash slurry?
Yeah, all of that stuff. I mean, I always tell people, like, economic development could be really easy in West Virginia. First, we just need to clean the place up. Give us 10, $15 billion, and let's clean Southern West Virginia. Let's clean up all this acid mine drainage. Let's pay people Davis-Bacon wages. We don't need to create lavender farms yet. We don't need to do this slick entrepreneurship. We just need to help people get back to work if they want to, and get paid a really good living wage to be able to stay in their communities. And if we do that type of large-scale CCC, WPA type reconstruction for West Virginia, we have plenty of work for.
You glitched again, but John, why can't Ted run
rocket science? That's what.
Oh, he's back here.
Ted, why can't you just run the state?
Oh, yeah, right. Well, Ted, but that work, you know, economic development is also workforce development, and you know, you have to have the capability to, much of which depends on your education system. Okay, what kind of folks, you know, it's generating, what its quality is. Which is probably one of the number one, you know, investment areas, because West Virginia workforce is not in great shape.
Nope.
And you know, it can't. I mean, I'm not sure that that any inducement is going to get high-paid Silicon Valley and companies, you know, to come, you know, land in Charleston.
No, that's why that's crazy to even think about that. Not going to happen. I think the worst people at economic development are the people that work in economic development, personally. Because good economic development is boring, very boring. Let's think: good schools, good quality of life, good recreation. Do you have good clean water? Do you have good infrastructure? Do you have a nice library?
Quality of life.
Rocket science. You know,
quality of life is
important.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be a calculation, man. For now,
you don't have that. You can't have the other stuff. There's no such thing as entrepreneurship if A, nobody has any money, B, your schools are falling down, C, your roads suck, the river's polluted. I mean, like, you can't have those things. It's just not part of the solution.
So how much socialism do we need?
A lot. I mean, I think depending on how you define that.
Well, I define it basically as the relative size, simplistic economic and relative size of public to private.
John, may I ask a question of everyone here?
Yeah, we need a lot more.
Really quickly.
Jobs.
Hold on a second, Mike. Yeah, but go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is to everyone here. We're looking at these god awful numbers, right? Where are we at? 600,000 that we're estimating have COVID-19. And we're looking at, 35 to 40,000 deaths. One of the epidemiologists said every time you see a number like this, and I've talked to John about this before, is multiply it times 9.
9.
Multiply it times 9. He just said that. So because I'm terrible at math, I as I told John, we're both, it's like it's easier to multiply it times 10.
Well, your 9 is so hard, yeah. Right.
Just add a 0.
But numbers wise, that. I mean, I had said, I had thought, and I'd be interested to hear your opinions. I had thought we're probably going to infect close to 3 to 3.5 million people, and I think we're going to lose 1.8 to 2.4 million originally. That was and I said that to John a month ago. So where are we at with what you guys think? Numbers wise.
Come on, me, the center of budget. Yeah.
All of you, each go. What do you think?
We'll go. Let's go with Dr. McGill first.
I've heard some things that you're talking about.
Okay. Mike, I have that same fear because if it turns out that if we've caught this thing, but we don't have any significant immunity to getting reinfected, then we're going to all keep getting reinfected, which means that we're going to keep passing it on to others who are more vulnerable than us and getting more sick. And so, yeah, I think all predictions are on the table because we just don't know enough right now about this virus.
Boy, Dr. Mengele would be in his environment here, wouldn't he? From the famous Nazi doctor, he could just spin this into an entire theory of, racial purges and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so not kidding. I mean, that's the kind of, it doesn't take much fuel for those guys to, just to set themselves on fire.
I don't understand why you could get reinfected. I thought when you got it, you build up the antibodies and then you wouldn't get it again.
We don't know that yet.
See, we don't know if this if it acts more like the common cold where you can get, the cold over and over again, or whether it's like a flu vaccine where you get it that season, but you're good for that season, but next season you're vulnerable. We just don't know.
There are also reports out that it affects your brain as well.
Oh, I must have it then. I should go get tested now.
I keep waiting to lose taste.
I should go get tested now.
Oh, I'm like walking around my house going, still smells like a tomato.
So I want to ask Ted another a little bit more theoretical question here.
Jeez.
Because I don't know what your training in economics is. I assume you've got some because you write an economics newsletter, But when I ask the question, how much socialism, the same as how much capitalism. because we seem to have come into the end of the road on a certain balance.
Yeah. I think,
Um,
I mean,
where's it going, and where must it go?
we love our economy. We can look to other countries. I wrote an op-ed a couple of years ago, which is my favorite one. Is what's like we should adopt the Nordic model. And I tell people that all the time. It's so funny. All the right wingers at Heritage think like Norway and Sweden has more democracy than more freedom than the United States. What they don't realize is in Denmark, 1 out of 3 employees is public. So in the United States, it's 1 out of 7. They don't realize in Norway, 90% of people are unionized or under a collective bargain.
Yay.
Yeah.
You know, in Sweden, for instance, I mean, if you go to Sweden, you have 481 days of maternity leave. Like we have 0, unless you live in there's a couple states, California being one of them. But I think the model is pretty clear about what we need. If we want to move towards social democracy, that would be a hell of a step, and it would be well beyond what even Bernie Sanders was talking about. But you know, even these right-wing governments in Europe, some of them have
the discussion forward.
Yeah.
Bernie was.
But we have
Bernie was here
the
in
United
spirit.
States has the stingiest welfare system in the industrialized world. It always has. We're one of the only countries that doesn't guarantee health insurance. We have a very stingy unemployment insurance system. You have to understand half the people in society, if not more, don't work. And that's because they're retired or children. So you have to have a very robust welfare state. In the United States, only half the people work with good reason. People have disabilities and people are babies and older, but you have to have a generous welfare state. And I think when you look at the Nordic model, that would be a hell of a step toward doing that. But our foundations, and unfortunately a lot of our unions too, don't support moving towards social democracy. And to me, like, that is the biggest impediment we have, is because they refuse to do that. And it's like Medicare for all. I mean, like one of the big reasons all these think tanks didn't talk about it in DC is because the foundations and the unions, a lot of them won't let them have.
Well, you know, way back in 1919, Big Bill Haywood,
oh, God, I love Big Bill.
one of the leaders of the IWW and a founder of the Communist Party, actually.
The Wobblies, yay, Wobblies.
And, but anyway, Big Bill Haywood, you know, didn't believe for a long time, didn't believe that it was really proper to sign contracts with corporations.
Yeah, we have corporate unionism. I mean,
and because we, you'll somehow end up, losing your soul, although it's hard to see how there was any alternative to the demands of collective bargaining in the 30s, other than, full-scale civil war at the time. So
the hardest part now is that liberals rather be right than win. And I think that is the most annoying fact. They don't want to build power. Like we talked about voter suppression, like in Wisconsin and other places. Like the left wing should be saying, how do we get as many people to vote? Like how do we make sure we have a day off for voting? How do we have automatic registration? How do we make sure everybody that's incarcerated can vote? Like we need to be doing everything we can. How do you have we had 83 years of Democrats in West Virginia, no collective bargaining agreements for public employees.
Yeah.
All of those things build the base of the Democratic Party if they choose to do that. The right wing understands that completely. That's why they do voter ID. They do all that stuff because they know those people don't vote for them. Yeah. And that's why they want fewer public employees. We should advocate for a hell of a lot more public employees. They support.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like what Trump said. He said if everybody voted.
We need to be upfront about that and have it as a project instead of being above the fray. Yeah.
I hear you.
We got to quit being above the fray. We got to be in the fray. I always tell people, be in the fray, not above the fray.
Right.
JB said that too. It's like JB was talking about Trump didn't just say it, but the legislator down in Georgia said it too. If we let all these people vote, Republicans will never win.
Well,
that's the point.
Yeah, they'll never win again.
Well, it's like stacking the court. It's like making DC a state. Like that is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Like that is another couple. The Senate's already anti-democratic. We realize that, right? Like, do it. Puerto Rico state. You got it.
It's getting to the point where it's like JB's working for somebody and the CEO puts his hand on his heart and goes, "Yes, JB, you can have a raise, but you know what I get in return."
I'm not sure the billionaires believe that much in democracy anymore, and
I agree.
And so the undemocratic aspects of things don't bother them that much, and they've developed this weird base, through Trump that where a bunch of other people don't care about it either. And so when I think about this kind of thing about how the unions are in a difficult labor law in the United States, basically only certifies unions by firm pretty much. And that's the restriction, right? That has this ultimately killed us. Plus, endless anti-labor leadership in the labor boards, over the years.
Yeah.
Well, but we have to find a way to put together, the kind of coalition, and I don't see how any of it can be done without taking control of the energy industry in the state. I just don't see how there's no bank account, otherwise, okay?
Right.
Too poor otherwise, unless you get that wealth in whatever way you can. And somehow, it seems to me that it ought to be economically possible to an argument to make to ordinary people all over the state, look, there is no money except there, and it should be the people's ownership that comes out of the ground. That's you're supposed to be sovereign government of this state. At least when it's in the ground, it's yours.
Yeah,
And
like Alaska.
So you have to do something
exactly,
about it.
JB.
And I think on that question, it ought to be possible to win. But we have some people. I think sometimes the environmental efforts, for example, that oppose every kind of existing development related to that thing, end up in a situation where they don't want to have any part of that. How are you going to change it? What money are you going to use to do anything? So I like the way you're talking, and I wish we could get it focused on that, and then you would take away Joe Manchin's #1 weapon. Frankly, when he's bad, okay, and when he's good, I understand Joe.
I was thinking
But,
of something recently too in West Virginia politics. Like when you have poor areas too, and people run for office and try to make a difference, it's very difficult because their constituents don't have money. There's not a big middle class.
Right.
I was thinking about South Carolina. I personally was a Bernie fan, but with Claiborne, when he endorsed Biden, and people were asking, well, how did this happen? And the fact of the matter is, in the South, there's less money down there. Even if you have a constituency that is very, we saw the polling in South Carolina too, that they support Medicare for all, and people, But the fact of the matter is, when your constituents don't have a lot of money in your base, and that's how you react, have money. So people like Claiborne, and get a lot of money from big PACs and big healthcare industry.
sure.
And so you actually get a lot more of a conservative politician. I never really put that together in terms of, but that's a hard thing to solve in West Virginia. It's hard to run for office and do those things because people, the base that you want to support doesn't have the money to help fund your campaign.
Victor Reuther's memoir about his brother Walter, he recounts a conversation that allegedly took place between Reuther and Charlie Sloan, at the time was the head of GM. And Reuther kept saying to him, why the hell don't you support national health care? Because otherwise, if you don't, I'm going to hold you hostage, and I'm going to make you pay for it like a socialist state for cradle-to-grave coverage for the auto workers that you employ, which at the time was several 100,000. And Sloan said, I agree 100% with you, but I have members of the insurance industry on my board of directors.
That's right.
And they are not
Exactly
interested
right.
in being confiscated.
Yep.
And so we can't do that. And Reuther says, well, then I'm going to strike you until you pay.
Right.
Okay. And of course he did that. And earned a great place in the history of labor, actually. So that I see.
I think he's from West Virginia.
Wheeling,
Yeah, I think
right? Isn't Walter Reuther from Wheeling?
Yeah,
I think he is. That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Victor went to WVU. You know that?
Oh, did he really? Oh, okay. But anyway, so in that exchange, you can see how this, because we didn't do it in the 30s, right? When there was the part Roosevelt had it on his agenda, but it never got to that, right?
Yeah.
And so now the private insurance industry is so intertwined with Wall Street, and it's a gigantic resource of capital. It's going to be very difficult to disentangle it. I think that partly explains the unbelievable reluctance of forces that are tied to that, like Hillary, for example, and I think the Biden, that certain section of the Democratic Party, Bill Clinton.
Well, Canada went the opposite direction. I mean, that was the big difference between our unions and ones in Canada when they pushed for single payer,
Right.
multi-province payer. I mean, Tommy Douglas, Saskatchewan. I mean, that was his big legacy.
Right, Mouseland.
We used to always show Mouseland to warm people up.
I'm going to play that. That's another one I'm going to play in my.
Well, yeah, and the Democrats should play that every day.
Larry Matheny used to play that all the time. It was great. So I first saw it.
I've seen it at least 10 times.
Watch out for the little mouse with an idea.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we're electing cats.
Sometimes I feel like
cats with white spots, black cats with white spots.
Everybody's talking about the conservative part of the Democratic Party. Sometimes I feel like we should all just take our foot and kick them in the ass to the left. That's all.
But I think that intertwining of insurance capital is the reason why it sticks so hard. I mean,
yes,
you're right.
Exactly,
they can't
John.
figure out a way to get out of it. I see that in Paul Krugman's columns. Okay, he says it's too thick. You can't get out of it except incrementally. Okay?
You pull out one string, all the others just rip apart, right, John?
Yeah, but then
you gotta throw him a bone.
Krugman was for single payer until it was on the agenda. I always thought that was funny.
But yeah, right. That's true. Yeah,
but
then
if you throw him a bone, you got to do a switch. You got to do a bait and switch with gun insurance. Make all the gun owners insure their guns, and then make health care for all.
But everything
as a trade.
Everything has changed now. I mean, it has. Okay, I mean, the insurance industry is going to go broke if it doesn't get bailed out. Okay, and the private healthcare system cannot handle this epidemic.
So
where
was the CEO of Humana the first couple weeks of the virus?
I don't know.
Where was he, Mike?
Where was he, Mike?
He was in a condo convalescing in Florida. These guys don't give a shit. They don't care.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's your point. Okay.
I get that.
We talk about these guys. Sometimes I see people of wealth and means that feel a certain responsibility, and you can understand them, and it comes across in their demeanor. But more often than not, I think we've all seen it. We see these devout capitalists who have all this money who, quite frankly, just don't give a shit about people. I mean, that influences other people. Look like we just saw in Michigan. Look at the protest. I want to go back to work and not have to wear my mask and kill people, damn it.
Well, we just paid $2.2 trillion, okay, to mostly, well, not entirely, but in large part to keep corporations from going bankrupt. Should the United States, in exchange for that $2 trillion, get a stake?
Absolutely.
In at least the ones that are, quote, too big to fail.
Medium rare.
Cash, got to hand over the keys.
Well, I mean,
I think that's how other...
I'm trying to think of an appropriate social democratic, I don't know if
that's market socialism. It's good.
Well, that's okay. I mean, the Chinese are showing that kind works pretty good, actually.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to, when I was talking about estimates about numbers and stuff, I think we're so far behind in terms of estimating how much this is going to cost. Because my wife is so smart, and you guys know that, and she's a lot smarter than I am, and she's probably a lot smarter than most of you guys.
You know why that is? Because she invented the IQ test.
Oh, just stop it. Oh, you're just bitter because you failed. Anyway,
that's true.
She I think we estimated that it would be somewhere between $3 and $10 trillion.
Huh.
So you're already at almost 3 right now.
Well, the current funding runs out in July 1st, so they're going to have to do something in July.
Well, I mean, part of the thing, John, that a lot of people have talked about, Matt Bruning at the People's Policy Project, which I fully support, is creating a national social wealth fund where the public, where all of us own a stake in every single publicly traded company, and you get rid of the corporate income tax. It's the best way to get rid of the corporate income tax, is we all own a share of all publicly traded companies, and when they make money, we make money.
Oh, I like that idea.
That's market socialism. And the Alaska Permanent Fund is close to that ideal, but I mean, but they, it's not exactly like that, and then you just pay a dividend out of that fund. I mean, that's part of your, but the public, that's what's called market socialism, is like, we all get an ownership stake in all of those companies. That way, you can't avoid the corporate income tax at that point, right? You have to pay it out because we're all owners. So it's the best way to, figure
Sorry,
it out.
Mr. Bezos, pay up.
Well, I like that. That's an interesting idea. If you get a chance, send me a link on it. Will you? Okay.
Hey, well, it's almost 10 o'clock, and I want to say thank you to Ted for joining us.
Thank you, Ted.
Good discussion. Good
The
discussion.
IQ level just went way up on our show.
Yeah.
And
Thanks a lot.
Dr. Zaki McGill is he's one of our top people here in the Panhandle, and getting the NAACP regenerated, reorganized, and re-energized. I mean, it's a wonderful organization, which I'm a card-carrying member, and real
I didn't
proud
know
of
they
that.
handed out cards.
I don't think I would have been involved if it hadn't been for Zaki.
I'm registered.
Thank you, JB.
I'm a member.
Himself.
All right. Anyway, so okay.
And Mike, it's good to have Diesel on. I wish we'd got a little more from Jim Justice.
Well, I'll just tell you, I love the kids and the children. I done did it, is what I'm trying to tell you. Y'all be good, take care, don't be so damn liberal.
All right. Yeah. Right. All right. You like
Jimmy Dore show.
Okay. Well, that's probably a good point. We stay under an hour, then we stay under the radar of YouTube and Facebook and what they want to publish for video.
Stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. Take it easy. Thanks, guys. All right.
Thanks,
Great
Robbie.
being with you guys.
Bye-bye.
Likewise.